of Jewish Temple, Ark of the Covenant and the Prophets. The fate of the Ark of the Covenant has been a burning question pondering Bible scholars, theologians, biblical historians and archaeologists since the exile of the Jewish people to Babylon in 586 BCE. The most prominent of these is Vendell Jones and his search for the Kalel and the sanctuary of the congregation with its valued treasures, including the Ark of the Covenant with its 2 golden cherubim. The most well-known account is found in the Maccabean story about the prophet Jeremiah, who hid the contents of the wilderness tabernacle, Mishkan, 1. The Ark of the Covenant, 2. The Kalel, which held the ashes of the red heifer in the valley of Acre near the tomb of Moses, Moshe, not far from Mount Nebo. These were hidden because fate of the Temple of Solomon, Beit Hamikdash, was being threatened by the forces of Nebuchadnezzar, which many felt was built on the Temple Mount, Haram Asharif, in present-day Old Jerusalem. Over a century ago, Rabbi Rachnel Steinberg and Rabbi Mendel Tropper rediscovered the writings called the Emek HaMelech, Valley of the Kings, written by Rabbi Naphtali Hertz, in which several Mishnahs were recorded by 5 temple guardians who hid the treasures of Solomon's temple. Later, it was Solomon Schechter who discovered the ancient Talmud Tosefta, called the Masakei Kalim, in an ancient Geniza at the Old Cairo Ben Ezra Synagogue. Included in this discovery was an ancient scroll called the Temple Scroll that was purchased by Yigal Yadin. It was found in a cave by Muhammad Dieb near the Essene community of Qumran by the Dead Sea. Also discovered was the copper scroll, the Luch Nihashet, plus 2 large engraved marble tablets found at Mount Carmel that depicted the hiding of a vast hoard of temple furnishings and artifacts about 10 years before the first invasion of Nebuchadnezzar. The Jewish underground commandos from the Temple of Solomon were sent on a rescue mission to hide all the temple furniture, the altars and the golden curtains that were a part of the priestly ministry in the tabernacle of the dwelling. These 5 priestly commandos are today legendary in their stealth and prowess to accomplish the mandate to safeguard the treasures of King Solomon's temple. Their names were Shemer HaLevi, Shagai Haggai the prophet Zechariah son of Iddo, Zedekiah Zidkiah, Hezekiah Hizkiah plus Ezra the scribe, and Baruch son of Neriah, the scribe of Jeremiah. The leader of this group, Shemer HaLevi, was one of the priests who killed 2 of the 9 red heifers for the ashes to purify the temple, as recorded in 11 Maccabees chapter 2, 1. It is also found in the records that Jeremy the prophet commanded them that were carried away to take of the fire, as it hath been signified, 2. And how that the prophet, having given them the law, charged them not to forget the commandments of the Lord, and that they should not err in their minds, when they see images of silver and gold with their ornaments. 3. And with other such speeches exhorted he them, that the law would not depart from their hearts. 4. It was also contained in the same writing, that the prophet, being warned of Gd, commanded the tabernacle and the ark to go with him, as he went forth into the mountain, where Moses climbed up and saw the heritage of Gd. 5. And when Jeremy came thither, he found a hollow cave, wherein he laid the tabernacle, and the ark, and the altar of incense, and so stopped the door. 6. And some of those that followed him came to mark the way, but they could not find it. 7. Which, when Jeremy perceived, he blamed them, saying, As for that place, it shall be unknown until the time that Gd gathers his people again together, and receive them unto mercy. 8. Then shall the Lord shew them these things, and the glory of the Lord shall appear, and the cloud also, as it was shewed under Moses, and as when Solomon, Jeremiah, and the Maccabean account of hiding the tabernacle and the ark is viewed from Mount Nebo. Let us analyze this text briefly. It is one position to analyze any ancient document with the same respect we would give to modern historical documents. As a historian, one should look carefully at the historical context, the purpose and goal of the author, and with an acceptance that the author had possible access of documents more contemporaneous with his era than has survived the ravages of time. Here the prophet Jeremiah speaks of taking the wilderness tabernacle, the Ark of the Covenant and the altar of incense and placing it in a hollow cave near Mount Nebo, the mount where Moses had his last vista of the promised land and visions of the future of God's people. Deuteronomy 34 verses 1-3. And Moses went up from the plains of Mov to the peak Pisgah of Mount Nebo, facing Jericho, and Gd showed him all the land of Gilead to Dan and all of the Naphtali, and the land of Ephraim and Manasseh, and all the land of Yehuda as far as the sea and the Negev and the plain, the valley of Jericho, city of palms as far as Zoar, Mount Nebo in the land of Moab, present-day Jordan, has been identified with Jebel Nebo on the eastern shore and the northern end of the Dead Sea, 5 miles southwest of Heshbon. At about 2,643 feet in altitude and with its position overlooking the Jordan River, Nebo commands a view of all of western Palestine. Below are the plains of Moab, where Balaam cast his curse upon the tents of Israel spread out before him. According to 2 Maccabees, the cave dwelling was in the vicinity, but not necessarily on the peak of Mount Nebo, which also is an assumption that it is the place where Moses went up and beheld God's inheritance. Near this mount and with clear visibility of the church that resides on the peak of Mount Nebo is the Cave of the Column, where the main archaeological digs have been performed by Vendell Jones, Texan archaeologist who earned international fame as being the archetype of the Indiana Jones movie, Raiders of the Lost Ark. It was his institute that was credited in discovering 1. The holy anointing oil and the 2. Holy incense that was used on the altar of incense in the most holy place of the temple. 2 places in the Maccabean passage it speaks of other documents, such as found in the records and contained in the same writings. What were these documents and what records were contained in them? This question has taunted the minds of scholars and students of Hebrew history for millenniums. It was a memorable year, 1947, when the modern state of Israel became the national homeland of the Jewish people. That same year, 1947, an Arab Bedouin with a well-placed rock in a cave opening in an area called Qumran, on the northeastern shore of the Dead Sea, heard the shattering of a crock of pottery, and the religious and secular world ricocheted with a global reverberation as the Dead Sea Scrolls were discovered. I do not know how the story got started that I was throwing rocks at my goats. My goats were grazing down there in the flat. I was sitting right up there on that ledge. I was bored and started throwing rocks against some big stones to see if I could break them. One rock glanced off of a stone and went into a small opening, and I heard a strange thud and a cracking sound. I came down and slid into the opening. The whole cave was full of jars. There were 40 jars, but they were all empty except the ones here in the niche on the right side. We found 7 scrolls. One of them was the scroll that Yadkin got from Kendo, Muhammad Diab. 5 years later, in 1952, in Cave 3, QVJ3 at Qumran, a new archaeological find was unearthed by the workers under the dig supervision of Professor Gerald Harding. A 7-foot copper scroll was discovered. Dubbed the Copper Scroll, it was kept in secret, and the contents of this discovery were withheld from the public for 4 years. In this copper scroll, the ancient name of Qumran, יקע-פעננער, was recorded. Ancient maps of the Dead Sea area depict the modern Wadi Qumran, or the Canyon of Qumran, rather as the Wadi Sakaka. 5 years later, in 1952, in Cave 3, QVJ3 at Qumran, a new archaeological find was unearthed by the workers under the dig supervision of Professor Gerald Harding. A 7-foot copper scroll was discovered. Dubbed the Copper Scroll, it was kept in secret, and the contents of this discovery were withheld from the public for 4 years. In this copper scroll, the ancient name of Qumran, יקע-פעננער, was recorded. Ancient maps of the Dead Sea area depict the modern Wadi Qumran, or the Canyon of Qumran, rather as the Wadi Sakaka. The Adam Smith Bible Dictionary in the early 20th century identified Wadi Qumran as Wadi Sakaka. The Yishim, Essenes, would have called their community by the ancient Aramaic name of יקע-פעננער rather than the modern Arabic name of Qumran, meaning 2 moons. The copper scroll was pressed from the purest of copper. From the back of the scroll and engraved in reverse script, the Hebrew letters, when raised from the front and imprinted on a baked clay, imprinted the script in legible Hebrew like the embossing of a printer's ink pad on a sheet of paper. This scroll was taken to Manchester, England. The baked clay dissolved and the copper rolls cut to expose the archaic Hebrew writing on the corroded copper sheets. Most of the text in the copper scroll read like the inventory of a treasure, with enigmatic descriptions of where they were buried, including listings of geographical, topographical, and geological features to help the one knowledgeable in the language and vocabulary of the rabbinic literature to find the treasures outlined in the scroll. When the transcription was first released with wide international publicity, it was also met with intense scholarly skepticism, many calling it a hoax, a forgery, Jewish myth, works of a madman. Most scholars, even to this day, feel that the Dead Sea Scrolls and the Copper Scroll are a repository of the Herodian Temple Library in Jerusalem and the contents of the Temple of the Lord that were secreted away prior to the destruction and ravaging by the Roman forces under Titus in 68 to 70 CE. Yet the contents of the Copper Scroll depict a different picture. Here among the passages of the Copper Scroll was an inventory of the holy treasures that appeared to have been hidden by the prophet Jeremiah and the temple guardians prior to the destruction of Solomon's temple by the Babylonians about 422 BCE according to Hebrew calendar time, 538 BCE on the Gregorian calendar. Were the locations of these treasures never revealed and recovered for the services of Zerubbabel's temple by the temple guardians? So are they there today? Among the contents of the Copper Scroll was this passage. In the desolations of the valley of Acre, under the hill that must be climbed, hidden under the east side, 40 stones deep, is a silver chest, and with it, the vestments of the high priest, all the gold and silver with the great tabernacle, the Mishkan, and all its treasures. The Copper Scroll describes a hidden cave called the Cave of the Column by the River of the Dome, and with these descriptions were given internal and external landmarks, layering levels and other descriptions that not only needed the proper interpretive codes to reveal their contents, but also a good knowledge of the history and rabbinic language used in that era. The discovery of the יקע-פעננער, Valley of the Kings. Was this Copper Scroll the record and the same writing as referenced in the 2 Maccabean passage? Jewish scholars still felt that there were more records to be found. The hunt continued, but it was not until 1992 when Rabbi Rachnel Steinberg with his student Rabbi Mendel Tropper discovered in Amsterdam, Holland, the long-lost writings called the יקע-פעננער, meaning the Valley of the Kings, that had been written by Rabbi Naphtali Hertz ben Yaakov Elkanan in the year 1648 in Amsterdam. According to rabbinic history, Rav Hertz was known as a prominent and holy rabbi who excelled in the knowledge of the written and the oral Torah. His lineage of rabbinic knowledge came from the famed Rabbi Ari ben Luria, leader of the rabbinic mystical sages which included the great Torah sage, Rabbi Yosef Cairo, author of the Shulchan Aruch. According to the records, Rabbi Naphtali Hertz cited as his source the Massakei Kalim, a Tosefta addition to the Talmud, which is not found in any modern Talmud today. According to the discoverer of the יקע-פעננער, Rabbi Steinberg, in the Talmud Hurriat 12a, it describes the prophet Jeremiah, realizing that the destruction of Jerusalem and the temple was imminent, organized a heroic rescue operation. He commanded the king of Judah, King Josiah, who had recently repaired the Temple of Solomon and found the ancient writings of the Torah hidden in the temple. 1. To hide the Ark of the Covenant. 2. The bottle of anointing oil. 3. Aaron's staff and the chest sent by the Pelishtim, Philistines, to Israel as a gift to the God of Israel. Rabbi Tropper, also citing the Babylonian Talmud in Tractate Yoma 72a, stated that the Mishkan, wilderness sanctuary, and all its contents were hidden away but will one day be found. Yes, here the Mishkan or wilderness temple, which was built by Bezaleel in the Negev desert, under the supervision of Moses and the blueprint given to him by the LRD of hosts on Mount Sinai, was kept in a sacred repository in a grotto under the Temple of Solomon and was still preserved in the days of Jeremiah and King Josiah. In an article written by Rabbi Tropper, he writes the following. This house of worship, Mishkan, contained 1. The altar for the daily and seasonal sacrifices. 2. The elaborate menorah, candelabra, of solid gold. 3. The kalel copper urn, containing the ashes of the red heifer, and 4. The numerous other vessels utilized for the detailed services of the Kohanim, priests. Within the Mishkan's inner chamber, the Holy of Holies could be found. 5. The magnificent Ark of the Covenant containing among other sacred items. 6. The tablets of the 10 Commandments brought down by Moses at Sinai. Because of these sacred contents and the level of holiness attained by the prophet Moses, only the Mishkan reached a pure enough state to warrant that the Shekinah, divine presence of GD, come to rest within it for all eternity. When the first temple was built in Jerusalem, the Ark of the Covenant was placed inside while the rest of the Mishkan was buried beneath in a secret vault. The story does not end. Later in the 1990s, at Cambridge University was discovered work done by a Solomon Schechter in 1896, who had bought about 100,000 pages that had been discovered in a geniza of the ancient and revered Ben Ezra synagogue in Cairo, Egypt. According to the Torah, any document containing the name of the Holy One could not be destroyed. So when it was damaged or too old to be used, it was put in a document depository called a geniza. The documents within the caves of Qumran were also suggested as being a geniza depository for the Essenes or Herod's temple in Jerusalem. The reason being that Qumran was suggested as being a geniza is that every book in the Torah, writings, and the prophets, plus countless other intertestament writings and commentaries were represented in the Qumran library except the Book of Esther, the only book written by or about the Jews that does not give the name of Gd. Within the scrolls found in the Ben Ezra synagogue's Geniza in Cairo, Egypt was found a copy of the missing Tosefta, listed under the section of Kalim vessels, and noted to be the same source writings that Rabbi Hertz was citing in his 1648 Mishnayos. The only difference, these source writings were believed to be from the 8th and 9th century, 800 years earlier. Rabbi Naphtali ben Elkanan Hertz called these records Mishnayos and were included in the introduction of his text. The Mishnah, as the rabbinic written documentation of the oral traditions passed down by the Levites from the time of Moses, is the first section of the Talmud, which also includes the summary, called the Gemara. Let us now read these Mishnayos, now accepted as the records of Jeremy, the prophet, called the יקע-פעננער. English translation by the Vendel Jones Research Institute. Literally, Valley of the King, by Rabbi Naphtali ben Yaakov Elkanan. Jewish year 5408, 1648 CE. These Mishnayot records were written by 5 righteous men. They are 1 Shemer the Levite, 2 Hizkiah, 3 Zidkiah the prophet, 4 Shagai the prophet and Zechariah, son of Iddo the prophet. They concealed the vessels of the temple and the wealth of the treasures that were in Jerusalem, which will not be discovered until the day of the coming of Maschiach, son of David, speedily in our times. Amen, and so it will be. Let us quickly compose ourselves quickly with the implication of the introduction to these Mishnahs. 4 of the names are easily recognizable: Hezekiah, Hizkiah, Zedekiah, Zidkiah, Haggai, Shagai the prophet, and Zechariah the prophet, son of Berechiah, Mishnah 2, son of Iddo. Other names found within these Mishnahs include Shemer ha-Levi the Levite, Ezra the Cohen, priest, the scribe, Hilkiah the scribe, Mishnah 7, Baruch ben, son of Neriah with Zidkiah, Mishnah 9 and 10, and Hiluk, the son of Shemer ha-Levi, Mishnah 12. Shemer ha-Levi's identity is still unknown in the Hebrew scriptures, but the name, Shemer meaning watchman, attested on an ancient seal impression, appears to be closely identified with the name Shemer, great-grandson of Aaron, from the house of Merari. 1 Chronicles 6 verse 46. The Merarites were the family that was in charge of the singing in the house of the Lord by King David, after the ark was moved to Jerusalem. 1 Chronicles 6 verse 32. Yet this Shemer ha-Levi was soon recognized as the leader of a quintet of Jewish revolutionaries: Shemer the Levite, Hizkiah, Zidkiah, Shagai the prophet, and Zechariah son of Iddo the prophet. They were intent on fulfilling the commands of the LRD given to Jeremiah the prophet to hide and secrete the treasures of the wilderness tabernacle and a large part of the treasures of Solomon's temple away before the military forces of Nebuchadnezzar could take custody of them to Babylon. Whereas the Essenes were the custodians of the documents of Qumran in the 2nd century BCE to the 1st century CE near the Dead Sea, these documents were authored or co-authored by Shemer ha-Levi. 1-1 was writing on an ibex skin, 2-1 on a 7-foot copper sheet baked in porcelain clay, 3-1 a silver scroll, yet to be discovered, and the 4 latter writings engraved on 2 white marble tablets, which included the names and date of the Solomon's Temple commando, which accepted documents antedate the Essene community at the time of the Temple of Herod era in the 1st century BC to CE by 5 centuries. They stand as a class of writing by themselves. The ibex skin scroll, temple scroll, credited as co-authored by Shemer ha-Levi. The temple scroll, called the ibex skin scroll, was found at Qumran in 1950 in Cave 11, by the same Bedouin Muhammad Diab who found the Dead Sea Scrolls in 1947 less than 25 meters away. This scroll was also documented as being written by Shemer ha-Levi in the year 431 BCE. An extensive document, which multi-volumes have been written by the Dead Sea Scroll scholars, it was initially purchased by Yigal Yadin for the nation of Israel at the end of the 1967 Six-Day War and published in 1983. Professor Yadin was fascinated by the wording of the author, who wrote the script in the first person, suggested by some authorities that it was a dictated script given by the Lord of Hosts to Moses on Mount Sinai. In the ibex skin temple scroll was recorded a detailed account of how to reinstitute the temple services and the rituals. The descriptions of these furnishings described are felt by many scholars to be a description on how to put these buried treasures to use in the service of the Gena of Jacob in a future third temple. Included in the temple scroll are accounts of the ancient Hebrew festivals which were celebrated by the Essenes, but also instructions of the animal sacrifices that were not celebrated by the Essenes. As such, this document is not accepted by some scholars as a true Essene document, but a treasured document which was a part of their extensive library. Did the Essenes totally reject animal sacrifices? Yes and no. They rejected the sacrifices of the priests in Herod's temple as being from a false and corrupt high priest not of the lineage of Zadok, the high priest of King David. No, they may not have rejected animal sacrifices as long as the pure and authorized lineage of priests were in charge of the temple services. But the modern order of the Nazorian Essenes who trace their spiritual heritage to the Essenes of Qumran claim that in the Panarion written by Epiphanius, the Nazareans, they were Jews by nationality. They acknowledged Moses and believed that he had received laws, not this law, however, but some other. And so, they were Jews who kept all the Jewish observances, but they would not offer sacrifice or eat meat. They considered it unlawful to eat meat or make sacrifices with it. They claim that these books are fictions, and that none of these customs were instituted by the fathers. Panarion 1:18. Shemer HaLevi, along with being credited as a co-author of the Copper Scroll from Qumran and author of the ibex skin temple scroll. A third document attributed to Shemer HaLevi that was discovered in the archaeological digs of Israel are two immense marble tablets. Its whereabouts were unknown, so began hunt and eventual discovery of these two large marble slabs, originally on Mount Carmel of the prophet Elijah fame. The two marble tablets. Soon the archaeological hunt continued to the basement of a museum in Beirut, Lebanon, when two large marble tablets, found initially at Mount Carmel, were now discovered in the summer of 1952 museum renovations. Implications of the discovery were not recognized until years later. The ancient Hebrew script was written in bas relief just like the Copper Scroll, in that the letters were protruding out of the marble instead being engraved within the marble. As Rabbi Abraham Sutton noted, the writings carved on the two marble tables were identical to the writing on the Emek HaMelech, Valley of the Kings, and the missing text of the 9th century document, Masakei Kalim, found in the Tosefta Mishnayot 3 under the section of Kilim in the Geniza of the Ben Ezra Synagogue in Cairo, except for the opening statement. These are the words of Shemer HaLevi, the servant of Hashem, in the year 3331 of Adam. Yet this same Shimon HaLevi still seems to warrant a distinction of why he is not recorded in Scripture. We have one more clue. We shall soon see in the Mishnah 5 in the tractate Para. It lists the number of red heifers that were sacrificed since the time of Moses. After noting that one of the red heifers was burned by Ezra the Levite, then it records that an additional 2 red heifers were burned by Shimon HaTzadik. Shimon the Levite had now become Shimon the Righteous One or Tzaddik. Zedekiah, Zidkiah, is a name meaning Yahweh is righteousness. This sounds familiar as we identify it with the name of the last king of Judah, King Zedekiah, who reigned from 597 to 586 BCE. His original name was Mataniah, but was changed to Zedekiah by King Nebuchadnezzar, when he appointed him king instead of his nephew, Jehoiakim, 2 Kings 24 verse 17. 1 Chr 3:15. He was a morally weak and vacillating king, who at times appeared to side with the prophet Jeremiah, who was his grandfather, who also was pro-Babylonian. He even went to visit Babylon in the 4th regnal year, in what some historians suggest was for the great festival of Nebuchadnezzar, in which he erected his golden statue in the plain of Dur as recorded in Daniel 3. The era of Daniel and the 3 worthies, Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, who were thrown in the fiery furnace during that event. King Zedekiah later, upon returning to Jerusalem, succumbed to the pressure of the anti-Babylonians and the pro-Egyptians and rebelled against Babylon. This resulted in the 3rd capture in 20 years and final destruction of Jerusalem after a long and appalling siege between 10th day of the 10th month in the 9th regnal year, January 15th, 588 BCE, And the 9th day of the 4th month in the 11th regnal year, or Nebuchadnezzar's 19th year, July 19th, 586 BCE, his sons were killed in front of him, and then his eyes were removed from their sockets, and he was imprisoned in Babylon the rest of his life. 2 Kings 25 verses 1-7. J 39:1-7. 52:1-11. There was also another Zedekiah who was a prominent leader noted in the assembly brought together by Nehemiah, the governor of Judah, who with Ezra the Cohen and scribe set out a series of religious reforms, Nehemiah 8, which culminated in the reading of the Torah and the teachings contained within it. Governor Nehemiah then convened a great assembly to sign a covenant of reform. This included the prominent civil leaders, the Kohanim, priests, and Levites, and all the people of Jerusalem. Zedekiah was the first of the civil and political leaders to set his seal to Nehemiah's covenant of reform. As such, he was designated as the first representative of the people after the governor, Nehemiah. Nay 10:1. Was this the Zedekiah of the יקע-פעננער? Shagai, Haggai the prophet. One born on a feast day. Haggai, Shagai, the prophet, meaning one born on a feast day, became one of the most potent prophetic voices to the newly returned exiles from Babylon to Judea. In his 5 messages recorded in the book of Haggai, he encouraged the people that they were in active cooperation with the Lord of hosts and that their faithful service would be richly rewarded by their GD. With the resounding response to his first message on August 29, 520 BCE, the clarion call went out to rebuild the house of the Lord which lay in ruins, Haggai 1 verses 1-12. It appears that he was a senior citizen in Judea, a revered grandfather of the returned exiled Jews. What they may not have known, Haggai was one of the guardians of the treasures in the Old Temple of Solomon, Haggai 2 verse 3, when he challenged his contemporaries. Is there anyone among you who saw this house in its former glory? You can almost hear him say the obvious, I did. As we shall soon see, he was one of the guardians of the temple treasures, a memory that was sealed within his memory to his death. While the people mourned that the new temple did not have the glory of Solomon's, Shlomo's temple, the whereabouts of the treasures that could have increased the glory of this temple was known. But the Lord of hosts would not allow it to be revealed until a future and more glorious temple in the future of history of the Jews. Why did he not reveal where the hiding places for these hidden treasures to the leadership of Judea so they would eventually be restored into the house of the Lord in Jerusalem? Zechariah, son of Iddo, Elohim God remembers at the appointed time. Zechariah, the prophet, the son of Iddo's life has been accounted for in the Oracles of Zechariah, a commentary on the book of Zechariah. What we now know as the rest of the story, Zechariah was not only a contemporary of the prophet Haggai, the renowned civil leaders Zedekiah, Hezekiah, and Shemer, the Levite, a possible member of the temple chorus, were all accomplices in the secret and delicate espionage of hiding the treasures of the Temple of Solomon, not only in the land of Judea but also in the city of Babylon and also near the city of Baghdad. Wait a minute. The capital of Iraq of Saddam Hussein was the purported site of the repository of hidden treasures from the era of Solomon's temple? Yes, this is the implication of this document that has been preserved in the archives of the Jews for centuries. Not only that, it was the intent of the 5 guardians that the wealth of these treasures would remain concealed until the day of the coming of Mashiach, son of David. It was their hope that the coming of the Mashiach ben David would have been speedily in our times, but as we now know, they carried their secret to their grave except for the legacy recorded on these Mishnayos. There was another record. This team working in concert with each other, they inscribed the inventory of these holy vessels and the vessels of the temple that were in Jerusalem on a luch nihashet or a copper plate or sheet, hoping it would be preserved until the end of times and prior to the coming of the Messiah, Mashiach. Shemer HaLevi engraved in bas-relief on 2 immense marble tablets the same Mishnayos for the sake of preservation of the record. The prophet Jeremiah and the 5 guardians of Solomon's temple treasures. The יקע-פעננער, the story of the 5 Hebrew priests who hid the treasures of Solomon's temple. Slowly, the Almighty One of Israel is opening the gates of the supernal realm surrounding the throne of GD. He is revealing to us a mini-vision of our future as we become one with Him in the future millennium of the Great Shabbat. The struggles we will have within this era will be to give up of ourselves, allow humility to become a part of our lives, for within each us is the sublime message that if we are willing to submit ourselves to His will, the power of the divine will help us to jump the hurdles into our future. Then we realize that the Eternal One now reveals to us that the future of our eternity was given to Metatron. He was the first of creation, the most exalted being of the heavenly realms. He was the vizier to the Holy One of Israel, as vizier like Joseph was to the Pharaoh of old. Here is a majestic being who is in charge of running the universes of the divine. And he was the same being that led the children of Israel out of Egypt to the mount called Sinai, this time as a pillar of fire at night and a cloud to shade the daytime. Metatron was the guide to Moshe in the wilderness. It was here where he helped to lead and guide the great Redeemer of the children of Israel. Metatron became the neshama soul of Moshe in heaven that was connected with the indwelling soul, or the neshama soul of Moshe on planet Earth. As such, Moshe, as we also may, kept in constant touch with the Divine One for man, created in the image of GD, has always had direct line access with the GD of Israel. If you have wondered how biblical prophecy fits into your life, and how it will affect the return of the house of Israel, then the GD of Israel is beginning his call to bring you home too. You might desire to reconnect with your cousins the Jews and the biblical portrayals on what is and may be happening in your near future. This biblical portrayal includes prophecies that the lost tribes of the house of Israel are about to return to the land of their biblical inheritance. This is divine destiny in living reality as the 10 lost tribes of Israel return to their homelands, first in Shamron, Samaria, Israel,